Lise Klaveness, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much.
In 2022, you became the first female president of the Norwegian Football Federation after 120 years. How did that come about?
Oh, yeah, that's, I guess, a short and a long story. The short one is that I was asked by the nomination committee. I was the technical director in Norway for the men and women's football. And it was a very turbulent time in Norwegian football. We had big discussions around Qatar case and also some equality discussions politically. So they didn't really affect, of course, the Qatar case affected the sport, but I was technical director, hiring the coaches and working very technical director. I was sort of sports director. So I was very close to the field and the coaches and the players. And then the nomination committee, out of the blue, asked me very late in the year. Normally they would ask candidates before the summer, and work with them. And then they nominate them in December. And then they're elected in February, March. And I was asked by the nomination committee in beginning of December or, very late if I wanted to run for presidency. And I said, no, hell no, I really don't want that. I never thought about it. I'm also from the administration and I didn't want to challenge my boss, the president at the time. And it was just, for me, a random question. Then the president resigned, the current president resigned, and then they called it back again, and I still said no. And this guy, he really wanted from the sport, who sort of was not from grassroots or, no political background, but just from the sport. And I guess also the first female one. So he was really persistent and kept calling. In the end, I felt actually a call to duty. It was not a happy, when I said yes, it was out of responsibility and persuasion. Of course, now I feel lucky and privileged, and it's been also a long, valuable journey, but I was 100% persuaded into it. And I felt I'm not going to be a happier version after this than, I had the dream job being technical director. I really wanted it. It was fun and close to my heart. So I did not consider myself to be a politician, but I ended up in this job. And of course, I've learned so much.
I understand that. And now it's been 4 years almost, and you haven't held back. I mean, you spoke up very clearly in your FIFA speech in 2022 and have continued to do so. Has it always come natural to you to take a clear stance and not shy away from the tough discussions?
Yes, I would say that the speech in Doha, which you mentioned, that was at the end of March 2022, and I was elected 5th of March 2022. So these weeks felt like a year to me. I was a new president. This speech was just one out of 100 things I had to do or learn, but it was in reality only 3 weeks. So when I came to Doha and the FIFA Congress, I did not know anyone in the room. It was just a room of strangers to me. I came from a totally different environment, the locker room, a place where you're very direct to each other and feedback is very direct and honest. And so I did not have any political background. And of course, that gave me, I guess, a necessary naivety, coming into this room and did not know how controversial it was. Of course, later I really understood, and I also felt that it was radical and that people viewed it as radical. But it has also come natural to me later to be direct and to try to be transparent. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's free of faults. It's being direct, outspoken. 95% we say no to. So it's not like we speak all the time, but we have a culture or a culture also in the Norwegian Federation, but also in my team, so to speak, my closest team, that if we know that someone should raise their voice on this issue, and if no one else does it, we have to do it, to be at least contributing to good governance. So I would say it's natural in the way that this is how we work. I have that background. I'm a lawyer, I'm a judge. So I've sort of spent my life in training that in the end, you have to sort of be transparent with your arguments. And also as a person, I guess, if after assessment I conclude that this is wrong, I feel very obligated to say it. And when people ask, what result do you expect? Sometimes say, I don't expect any result. It's not my responsibility to get that result. But if I'm going to vote for something and I'm against it, it's very difficult to vote for something out of tactical reasons, because it can be a butterfly effect in the wrong direction. So I would say it comes natural, but it comes, of course, with a price and also some faults. And sometimes I agree with criticism also that, oh, we said we were too direct too soon, or so it's, I guess, a playing style also. It's how I am and how we are.
Yeah. And you mentioned politics before as well. And considering, like, let's say you want to make a political career within FIFA or rise within there, maybe then being outspoken and criticizing openly how things are is not quote unquote the smartest if you want to make a career there. On the other hand, you're raising a very important topic. So have you ever thought about that balance?
No, I know of that balance, of course, but I have no personal ambitions. I'm not a politician, so I take it as it comes, you know. So my ambitions is much more with the process. It sounds maybe cliche, but it's 100% how I think and work. And I wouldn't want to work where working transparently would stop such a career. That being said, we have to learn other cultures. And, you know, the Nordic culture is more direct than other cultures. And we should always be humble to other cultures and not offend people. And when we have done that, not deliberately, of course, that feels bad. And then we and I try to adjust because that has no value to offend people if that is not necessary, just because we are arrogant with our culture. Which I try to avoid that, but sometimes it has happened. And then that is something you need to adjust. I try to do that. But of course, like you say, very often I have to be tactical and we have to be tactical out of considerations for the result or for the team, for another case. So I never think about my own career or ambitions, but very many times we have to balance, okay, you can meet this media and say this, but you don't do it because it's not in the team's interest right now. They need comedy, for example.
Yeah, that's interesting. And continuing on the politics side, now we have World Cup 2026. We spoke about it briefly before here. Sweden qualified in the last second, so I'm personally very happy about that. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so World Cup 2026 for the men's will be held in US, Canada, Mexico. US is also involved in a war at the moment, and there were other criticisms, obviously, in 2022 in Qatar. Now in 2034 will be Saudi Arabia. So again, you know, talking about balance, you mentioned like you need to respect other cultures, but there are also certain issues in all of these countries mentioned. So the voting process for Norway was 1 point. So can you just think about how you as a federation are taking stands with regards to these countries and holding the World Cups there?
We try to be very principled. And of course, being very principled needs also pragmatism. So we try to never interfere with any foreign geopolitical affairs for the sake of it. That is someone else's job. And I think that I'm very passionate about roles because power is borrowed. You know, it's borrowed from a Congress. It's a mandate. And in my mandate, I'm not the foreign minister of Norway or Europe so we should never speak about abortion, politics. And of course, we can have views personally. But as a president, I would never speak about these things. So what I try to, and we try to engage in, is to be a very clear voice in following our own statutes. And in our own statutes, there are some very good rules for good governance and transparency around awards for World Cups, for example, and that the World Cups should not impose human rights risks to people. We should use the World Cup to speak about the good case, speak about human rights and try to use it as a leverage as good as it may be done to raise those issues. So for the Qatar case, for example, they held the World Cup and we knew that this award put a great risk on migrant workers building stadiums and infrastructure for the World Cup. And that was the case we spoke up against. It was not Middle East as such or religion or, it was the kafala system. And it was a country that didn't have infrastructure from before, and also the heat and different dimensions work together in making the risk unacceptable for great human rights risks for migrant workers building and making the World Cup possible. When it came to the Saudi Arabia award, it was awarded at the same time as Spain, Portugal, and Morocco 2030 World Cup. And we made a protest or a remark in the protocol. Norway made a remark in the protocol to that Congress. And that had nothing to do with the countries as such, but the process, that there was no real competition, and that in our opinion or our assessment, the process was such that, I'm not saying it was rigged, but it was made in such a way that it was a huge danger that it was difficult for us to assess if it was rigged. On the day that they should announce the competition, it was announced the hosts for the 2030 bid, so that people could think and had reasonable reasons to think that it was rigged to make it possible for Saudi Arabia to be awarded without competition. I'm not saying that's what happened, but because the process and the statutes were not followed with due diligence, that is a danger. So we try, and also with the United States now, the award to the United States happened before my time, but then I think that followed, and Mexico and Canada followed a thorough process. And that was one of the first awards to follow that new process that was put in place in FIFA in 2016. But after this award, of course, the country has geopolitically changed, and the statements coming from the leadership of the United States has, of course, raised some very crazy questions, which we never dreamt about when the award happened. But these are at the state level also. So now we cannot comment on all scenarios happening, but we try to focus on 3 issues. And speaking with FIFA on 3 issues, the one is that everybody should be safely allowed into stadiums, being LGBTQ or people from different continents, and that ICE should not operate in stadiums and around stadiums and use, because that is in the FIFA statutes, that the World Cup should not in itself impose risk for human rights breaches, and also that everybody are allowed safely into the country. The World Cup is not that we try to respect the rules of arm's length distance to state and politics, because it's very easy for countries to use the World Cup as a platform for their own politics, regardless of what that politics are. There are rules in the FIFA statutes to avoid that, but those rules need to be adhered to and implemented.
That's really interesting. And the first point that you brought up there, to be able to be safe. If we talk about Saudi Arabia, they are not open with the LGBTQ community. And the women's rights is on a completely different level of what we are used to, maybe in Nordics, as you mentioned before. And you yourself have a wife and 3 kids, I think. So, I mean, suppose like that you will travel with a Norwegian team, and how does that make you feel? Do you feel safe to enter such a country with the laws that they have?
Yeah, I feel safe when I travel in this role, and I felt also safe in Qatar. Of course, when I held the speech, it was my first time in Qatar performing public criticism to the country, I guess. And I was 3 weeks into my position, so that was an uncontrolled, in a country where it's not allowed to be married to one of the same sex. So it was then a difficult task. But now, many years later, I know that traveling in my role with the delegation, I feel safe. I also have always been treated with very big respect when I travel to the Middle East countries. So that is very important for me to say. On the one side, I think it's very important that football is played everywhere, not just in democratic countries where equality has come far, or I think that is the biggest value of football. But when you have World Cups, which are the biggest events in the world, Football World Cup, Soccer World Cup is the biggest event you can have. It's a huge footstep into the environment and the society. Then it's very important that these rules are followed, when it comes to building of infrastructure, when it comes to what are you using the platform to speak about. In fairness, Saudi Arabia is at least using the award of the World Cup to them as a platform to speak about their liberal changes. If their changes are as vast as they are saying, I'm not in a position to judge, but they're at least using it to speak about modernizing and opening up, especially on the equality side. Of course, on the LGBTQ side, that is difficult in all non-democratic countries now. Being Russia, being Middle East, being United States, this is very difficult. And this is where very many autocratic leaders meet. This is a subject they agree on. And that is, of course, not a good thing. It's a bit depressing. And we have to just work from sport to keep on the rainbow flag and the message of inclusivity very high. Not easy, But in times where things are very difficult, we cannot give up, then we have to put our shoulder against the door a little bit, and we cannot say what would be the progress made. Sometimes you have to sort of keep the standing, and stand where you are and try to keep the position, or maybe be even pushed back a little bit, but then be a bit stubborn. And then the time will be 12 again at some point, and then at least you have your integrity and maybe some followers, and you can restore. But of course, it's not a good time now for a rules-based system, not in football and not in the geopolitical world.
Definitely. And it's some people argue that sport and politics shouldn't meet, but I feel like it has to in some way or another. And I think it's pretty clear here to what you say as well.
It's how should you avoid it? I think all people that work in football, we agree that we should, as long as we can, try to avoid to bring politics into the field. You want your team to be welcoming to left-wingers, right-wingers, Muslims, Christian. I think we are all agreeing on that. Of course, that is also to a certain limit. You need to be very political orientated and very active to be able to keep the field that way. To keep it as open as that needs, I think, real leadership and real passion for inclusivity. If that is politics, then we need to be political. But for me, that is sort of license to operate for football. And every limitation to that needs very clear reasoning. That is the political limitation to the starting point that football should be for everyone.
Definitely. This episode will launch 1st of June, and then we'll be just a couple of days away from the World Cup. Now we are beginning of May. So in your line of work, how does your work look from now up until the World Cup and during?
It's extreme days, but on the other hand, this job, I travel many hundred days every year anyway. We have a long country in Norway. I guess you also had that in Sweden, but comparison, we used our districts a bit more than you. When I played in Umeå in Sweden, it was so far up north in Sweden, but it's at the same height as Trondheim in Norway, which is our mid. We have so many big teams, Bodø being one example, further up north. So just to visit our teams is plane rides every week. So I travel a lot. But of course, now it's much more. Now, tomorrow I go to Prague. Then I go to Gothenburg, and then I go to Istanbul for the Europe League final, and then I go to Budapest for the Men's Champions League final. Then we have the Women's Champions League final here at Ullevål. The first time in history we have a Champions League final in Norway, so it will be great. Then I travel to Budapest, and one day after that I go to United States, 2nd of June. First we play Sweden, 1st of June, here at Ullevål. Hopefully we win. It will be important. It's a friendly game, but it's Sweden, so it will be tough. Then we go to United States 2nd of June, and the World Cup starts for our part 16th of June. It's extremely busy. I have 3 kids, so it's not ideal from a logistics point of view, but I'm not complaining. And then hopefully I will stay in the United States as long as the World Cup lasts. Maybe that's arrogant to say. We haven't been to a World Cup since 1998. But of course, in sports, we're always very optimistic. So we plan for success. Yeah, that's my life now, to prepare and to be on planes and planning for the next trip always.
I understand that. And is it, you mentioned that it's always a lot of traveling, but extra intense during a World Cup year, I assume?
Yeah, in May, normally we have had so much peace in the summer because of our lack of ability to qualify, but we have been to all World Cups and Euros in history for women. I know how intense championships are. It's weeks and weeks. It's like this Big Brother, Big Brother, the house where people. Then I know you. What? How old are you?
33.
You're just a kid. So people stay together for such a long time, and it's intense. It will be very fun, but also intense. But yes, it's more intense now with World Cups than ever before.
I understand that. And best of luck to Norway in the World Cup, except for when you play Sweden.
Yeah, same to you. Same to you. 100%.
Thank you. So I'm interested also in your background. We have alluded to it a little bit that you were a player. Also, you were a lawyer, technical director. So can you talk a little bit about your background and how you came into this line of work?
Yeah, sure. I started to play. I'm from a place on the west coast of Norway. in a small place in the countryside of Norway where it's very rainy and a typical West Coast, rain and never snowing, really like 0 degrees half of the year. And it was a football place. A lot of people played football. I started pretty late to play, maybe because I'm a girl and the references are more to boys football. A lot of girls did play, but I didn't take really interested in until a bit later, where my dad watched a game I was playing just randomly. I played a game I was asked into, and I saw from his face that that he didn't find that I was very good. Football. He was a good player, and I just sensed that this was a currency to him. That was something that mattered to him. He has never been a pressuring dad, or he's always let me be. But I felt there was something there I didn't get to, and it got me curious, or I would say even obsessed, to why didn't you say that I was playing well? And he was sort of just rejecting me and say, it's a bit too late now, Lise, and you can be good at other things. But then I really wanted to understand. And then I remember he said, then you have to be able to juggle the ball 100 times with control, because then he realized that I really wanted answer. And that was the sentence he said to me. And then from that day on, I was obsessed to juggle the ball 100 times with control. Every other times right, left, never on the thighs, on the wrists or on the feet. And that I started to do. And that was my project the first summer, just to juggle. In the end, of course, that's the good thing with juggling, you get progress. If you are, narrow enough and stubborn enough and repeating enough, then after that summer, I started to sort of discover really the game, and I became more and more technical. And my biggest goal was to juggle the ball from home to school without dropping it to the ground. And it took hours and hours. And every time I dropped the ball, I had to go back to pick the ball up again. So that was really, and then I was a youth. So it was a little bit of a social suicide. But I think looking back, I think it was also me trying to sort of control a very difficult time. It's difficult to be youth, not a child, not grown up. And I was, I guess, a bit more mature than my age and less mature, in some other areas. So it was like, I guess we all struggle in that age. So juggling really took over. And at some point I became a good player. And that was more of an obsession, I think, than anything else. I trained 7, 8 hours a day before school, at school. And then I just went to the field and trained with all teams, even old boys. I was in like hundreds of old boys practices with my dad and his teams with 60-year-old men. So it's a very strong memory still for me, that time of age. At some point, I became good and became a professional player and came to the national team. And I started my law school. Ever since I was a child, I wanted to be a lawyer. Football was just an obsession. I never had really any goals. It was just that I wanted to master everything. I wanted to juggle, I wanted to head, I wanted to have left foot. I had no limitation of what I wanted to learn. It was me and the ball, and later me and the team, and later being captain, and so more and more discovering that gift of, it was just passion. But my work was supposed to be a lawyer, and I think I also explicitly said to many that I never wanted to work in football. I wanted to have it as a hobby. I didn't want to earn any money. I just wanted to be a passion. But at some point I became a lawyer, and I became a judge, a deputy judge at Oslo City Court. But then at some point, they called me from the federation after I quit the national team. Also played in Sweden in 3 years, like I told you before, which was amazing years. We played Champions League, and I played with Marta, the Brazilian amazing player, and Hanna Ljungberg and Malin Moström, and great Swedish players, which I learned a lot from. But then I quit, and I became, I also worked as a lawyer when I played. In Umeå, I worked in the Umeå tingsrätten. As a notaria. So that was in my studies. So I was noting what the criminal people and witnesses was saying. And back then I thought Swedish and Norwegian was just the same. So I thought it would be easy for me to write Swedish. But it was very difficult in that line of work. It went very fast. So I remember that time very well. But then I was called by the federation when I was about to work in the court as a judge, if I wanted to be technical director. And I didn't. Just as when I was asked to become a president, I said, no, I don't. I find it very nice that you ask, but I want to work as a lawyer. But then they wanted, again, they never had a female technical director before. And I worked as a TV pundit back then, commentating men's game. I was the first woman to comment men's World Cups in Russia, for example. So I was known in Norway for that. And of course, since I was the first woman, I got a lot of shit. I think all pundits get a lot of shit, but then being the first woman also more around how you look and how you speak, and it's a lot of more than just football. So I was very many years in that I wanted that to go away from the next generation. I wanted to change things so that people would, girls could and women could do this without this harassment. That's why I was asked to become a technical director, because I had all these years of preparing, calling coaches, calling directors, preparing for the games. I was a very preparing person. And I was sort of persuaded a bit into becoming this technical director and stepped away from my lawyer and judge ambition, which was a bit of a grief, but of course, very, very exciting. And then the rest is history. I told you about when I became president.
Yeah. So first female technical director at the Norway's Football Federation, first Norwegian woman to comment a men's game, first woman to become the president of the Norwegian Football Federation. Do you see yourself as a trailblazer for young girls coming up?
Sure, it's become my destiny, and I think the one thing has led to the next. And it started all back in when I was going into high school. Like I told you, I was obsessed. I really wanted to play. I slept with the ball in my bed until I was 16. I wrote poems on my ball, my orange winter ball. So I had a really emotional connection with football. And when I applied for this football high school, the only one we had in the region, I was turned down because it was only for boys. That was my first meeting with any political, because then I started to call the equality minister of Norway and a lot of people in power, which I just looked up in the phone book. Back in the day, we had like this physical phone book. So I remember it so well, like physically, like you're looking in this phone book and calling with this old phone, when there was this round number plate where you had to you're too young maybe.
No, I know it.
And then I called and I got in. This political mobilization helped me get in. I didn't want to do any politics. I just wanted to go into the high school and play football and also become a lawyer. So I wanted to have education in football. So then I was the first one in that high school. And then throughout my national team career, this followed me, that I could change things if I engaged. So if people called me and wanted help, I always tried, who can I speak to? And so I think the one thing led to another. I never wanted to be a trailblazer. I'm not more into equality than other things, but I am a person who wants to solve things. And I do think I can handle defeats, that I've always felt that I can speak, I can be able to represent, I guess. Or so when I became the first pundit, that led to technical director, and that led to become a president. So I could not become the first president if I hadn't done the other things. So, but of course, it's ended up in a trailblazing situation. But it all started with, I would say, advocacy as a person and like unstoppable passion for the game.
Yeah, but if there is a girl studying something, sports, football, sports management, anything, and they saw that I want to be the president of the Norwegian Football Federation. No, there has never been a woman there for 120 years. And then they might think that is not possible. I mean, just breaking these glass ceilings and showing, young women that this is possible. I think that this is huge. It's this thing with breaking the 5-minute mile, that no one had done it. And when the first guy did it, and they just kept on rolling. It's just that, you create that possibility for other women.
Yeah, I agree. And people did that also, of course, also before me on other areas, so I knew about, and in Norway, we had a great president back in the days called Per Nomdal. He was a man, but he was really working hard for women's football. He's still here as an honorary president and a mentor to me. We all stand on each other's shoulders. And I think, of course, it's very important to show girls, but also boys, that your boss can be a woman or a man.
Yeah. I mentioned before, I work in ice hockey. So in the hockey field, the women's hockey participation-wise is the one who's rising the highest at the moment.
Oh, wow.
How do you see like women's football versus men's when it comes to participation and, a lot of, reaching equality between men and women in football?
We have in Norway 1/3 of our members are women and girls, so we have over 30,000 girls playing football. It's a huge sport in Norway. It's by far the biggest. for girls. And it's also the second biggest sport in Norway if you separate men and women football from each other. So it's a huge sport. But of course, it's not so many women in football. You know, after you quit your career, it's not so many leaders, coaches, analytics. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm told very often in this area that be patient, it will change. But I've realized a lot of things are not changing for the better. It's getting worse, you know, for female coaches, for example. It's actually, for many years, it was less and less women because it was more and more positions made. And there were only men, especially on the men's side, and it was stuck. And the same with wages, you know, it's, of course, for many explainable reasons, but still the gap between professional female players and professional men players, the gap is growing and it's still growing. You know, even if you have a lot of girls now or women earning decent money being professional, it's less and less compared to the men that earns the most. And I, of course, I spend a lot of time discussing with myself, my team, and the world of Norway. Is that important? Should we compare men and women? Of course, and on one hand, no, because it's different markets, it's different genders, it's different perspectives in cultures. But on the other hand, we know that human beings compare. You know, if you have a daughter and a boy, they will compare. If the boy get 8 coaches following him to nutrition, to restitution, to recovery, to technical training, and the girl have 0.6, you know, one coach that has 50, the quality will be so different, then that will be unfair. So I try to have those two thoughts in my mind all the time, that I'm not an equality minister. I work also for the boys, and they compete with boys. And they need margins on their side. And top football is also money, and they need every penny, you know, but we also have to find areas where we can redistribute where it's win-win. It can be on facilities, it can be on communication managers, it can be on branding, it can be on different things where it's actually win-win and it's not taking from one side to another. But it requires real passion and real patience and consistency to be able to take the small wins you have, because it's not a quick win game, to say the least. So if you ask me how is that going, I would say it's a slow game. I look at it as a long game also, where success is where something we have to define ourselves. But of course, the vision for me is always that it should be equal. You know, it should be maybe not equal. I don't care about the top salary. You know, it's not a human right to earn 150 millions a year, you know, but the bottom, you know, the lower level, the standards, they should be equal. You know, it should be the same quality for youths to be able to be at their best. The same standards for the Premier League in Norway to showcase their sport. And if it's a different at the top level, well, that is more on the circus side.
I see. Because that's what people look at often, because you see this, you know, Erling Haaland type of salaries, and then you compare it to the top women, and then they change, the difference is very large.
Yeah, and of course it says something, but I think it's important. To me, it's much more efficient, and also it feels right to work with the lower standards, to raise the boat and to use the men's sport to raise the women's side and not sort of hold back anyone. Because football for men is a social, cultural phenomenon. It's uncomparable to anything, in Europe at least. That is, someone will sort of capitalize from that money. And of course, no one deserves that kind of salary, but that goes to finance people also. I don't go into that. It's not so important. But being a leader in football, to me, it's more to lift the grassroots, to lift the scouting for girls, the talent work, and also the standards for the Premier League, which is, of course, difficult enough. It's not like next week I can say, yes, that is... You know, if you want a job where you can go Friday home and like, oh, you know, I've done everything, you know, no, this job is, you know, eternal frustration and internal, you sort of passion.
For sure. It's 24/7.
Yeah.
So on that note, if there is someone, you know, a young person who listens who want to get into the sports industry, football industry, what would be some advice that you would give to them?
You know, it may be a bit banal, but it's always to keep it a bit simple. You know, you have to sort of work with the fundamentals. And, you know, that's why I always tell my story with the ball, because the reason why I became so passionate about the sport is that I trained so much with the ball. And I'm still very valuable to me to know that if it's necessary, I can put in the hours, and also, so that one part of it, that you have to sort of, what is the skill required, and work on it. Nobody can tell you that you cannot be a sports director or, but you have to do the work. You have to have the hours on the grass, or find a way. Then you can ask if you can train a junior team and the other thing is the metaphorical, to try to get the eye on the ball, because in some points of life, it's chaotic, you feel different things, but those feelings are feelings. But where is the ball? Where is the core of what you want to do? You want to be a leader, or you want to work in sport close to the field. So keep it real, keep it simple, and of course, put in the work. It shouldn't be a suffering, and it's not what I'm saying, but it's easier when you sort of discover that what separates a lot of people is that some do actually the work and some don't. And if you do the work, you cannot be frustrated before you do the work. And so when I became a pundit, for example, I did the work. I don't want to complain that women had to prepare more than men. This is preparation, and I think everybody should be really prepared. And that I always capitalized on later, because I really followed so many games, I called so many people, and not out of duty, but out of sort of a process mind. So that's one thing, and I would say the second thing is to always, find people that gives you energy. It sounds maybe also a bit banal, but so that in the fight, it needs to be fun also. This is one of my skills. Yeah, I fight a lot, and we have different cases, but I surround myself with funny people and humoristic people, and you have to be, what's it called, self-ironic?
Yeah.
But I would thirdly say that it's worth it. It's really fun to work in sports. The life is long, and it's a lot of boring work out there. So I love being a lawyer. I'm not saying that someday I would probably go back to that. I love that. But I also think that you have a competition every Sunday. You work very close with people, and it's a game. It's a fun. I really want more girls and women to sort of have that vision that they go over that threshold of pain, and then they find the fun, because of course it's a bit painful to be insecure and not find your way in the ecosystem. But when you find it, it's a passionate world, and it's, I guess, other lines of work will also be passionate to some extent. But I do think sports entities scores pretty high on passion for what you do, team spirit, that it's bigger than yourself, and all those things that bring meaning to your life. So I also recommend it, that so whenever I meet girls and boys, youths, I feel very passionately to persuade them, not the whole group, but the people that I see really want to do it. And I try to give them my number, and I give my number to, thousands of people, and I cannot help everybody, but I really want them to feel that they can call if they have to sort of be responsible and call if they want help. And very many people will help you, but you have to reach out.
Definitely. And I love all of those advice. And it takes me into my last question here also. I like to end on a networking question. And what you said, that to build your network, you give your number, someone can help you. So who from your network do you think would be a good future guest for this podcast?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. And then I want to give you an example of a person who really works this way. A person who I met many years ago. She came to Norway. She's an Afghan. She came to Norway, worked to get recognition for an Afghan refugee team as a national team for women. And back then, I never heard about her. I was just a new technical director, and she told me the story of how she had to fight to play football in Afghanistan growing up, and they had to have guards hiding that they played. And then they fought to play, and later, when Taliban took over, they had to flee the country. And now she worked to get recognition for this team to be a national team outside of Afghanistan. And she wanted FIFA to formally recognize this as a national team. And this is so many years ago. And I kept the contact with her, and she reaches out to many people, me included, for all these years. And I always thought, such a difficult task. But of course, I would support her in the way I can do. But how can she stand in this? And she did. And now in Vancouver, in the FIFA Congress, it was officially that the Afghan women's refugee national team was considered a normal national team, official national team, without the support of their federation. And this is Khalida Popal I'm speaking about. So please invite her. She's a hero and a role model.
Definitely. I will do that for sure. I know you're on a very busy schedule. Thank you so much for taking the time to join Sports Management Podcast.
No, thank you. Thank you for a good podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow the podcast on Instagram, X, and Facebook @SportsMPodcast.